Over the past decade, universities across America have embraced DEI policies, intended to promote representation among historically marginalized groups. They opened offices and centers to support that mission, and hired staff to work with university employees and students. After the racial justice protests of 2020, more schools across the country rushed to embrace efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. But then came the backlash.
The debate in colleges and universities over diversity, equity, and inclusion
DEI
initiatives.
Programs are under attack by conservative lawmakers and activists.
The governor said she wants to stop, quote, bad actors on campuses from pushing a, quote, liberal political movement.
Similar legislative efforts in more than a dozen other states seek to shut down or pare back DEI efforts in higher education and government.
And now it's arrived in North Carolina.
Well, DEI is DOA at UNC. The Board of Governors.
I'm Anissa Khalifa. You're listening to The Broadside, where we tell stories from our home at the crossroads of the South. This week, are we witnessing the death of DEI? And why?
Hi, I'm Brianna Atkinson, and I cover higher education at WUNC.
For the past few months, Brianna's been reporting on a story that started in 2019. That's when the University of North Carolina System's Board of Governors adopted a policy promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
So it covered all 16 public universities in the state, in addition to the North Carolina School for Science and Math.
And the plan for these schools was extensive.
It required each of them to have a DEI officer or somebody operating in a DEI officer capacity. Each school to have data collection, so they had to every university had to have someone representing them on a cross-university council. The UNC system also had their own DEI liaison that also oversaw kind of all the different DEI initiatives that were happening on campus.
But recently, Brianna says there was a major shift.
It was back in April, and it actually started pretty secretly. Every time the UNC Board of Governors is going to meet, they release an agenda with the items that they're going to discuss that day. They made a very last-minute agenda addition.
Added to the docket was a vote to repeal the DEI policy that affected the system's 48,000 employees and nearly 250,000 students. The motion passed in that committee and was eventually approved by the full board the following month.
Today, the UNC Board of Governors voted to get rid of its diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. This will affect all 17 public colleges and universities in North Carolina.
There's a North Carolina free speech law that sparked this, right? Or that's been cited as the basis for this. Can you tell us about that law?
Essentially, it tells universities and also university staff that are speaking on behalf of the university to avoid political controversies of the day or matters of social debate. But it's been around 2 years prior to when the DEI policy was first created at the UNC Board of Governors. So it's not something brand new that just happened that the Board of Governors is reacting to.
A lot of times this argument against DEI is framed as a free speech argument. Can you explain what that argument is?
I think that UNC system president Peter Hans, he explained it best in a Board of Governors meeting.
An official university position would hinder free expression and stifle the open-minded contest of ideas that is supposed to mark university life.
He was saying that universities aren't supposed to have opinions, and by that way, their staff aren't supposed to have opinions.
Higher education does not exist to settle the most difficult debates in our democracy. Our role is to host those debates, to inform them, to make them richer and more constructive. That's a vital responsibility, and we can't fulfill it if our institutions are seen as partisan actors in one direction or another.
It's a little ironic because a lot of people that are against what the BOG is doing, they say that this is having an opinion, having a right-wing leaning opinion, and they feel like it's partisan.
And to that point, this isn't happening in a vacuum. There's been a chorus of mostly Republican lawmakers who've been really critical of DEI. They've also argued that these policies are pushing a biased and even partisan position. How does this fit into larger trends around DEI on campuses in North Carolina?
I'd want to extend it even more than just on North Carolina's campuses, because really this kind of attack on DEI has been happening since Florida kind of introduced anti-DEI legislation, and then Texas. It's really it kind of started in southern states. Florida and Texas have both passed policies like in their legislatures against DEI offices, and that's led to hundreds of positions being cut. It's led to centers being shut down, and they are all saying essentially that it is political. Schools shouldn't have opinions on political topics, and North Carolina is following suit with what Florida and Texas are doing.
Why do proponents of DEI think this is happening now?
Yeah, the people that I've spoken with, some of them share a sentiment that this is happening because it's kind of the latest thing that's happening politically on a national scale. They all think that it's a political power play, essentially, kind of like when people were going against critical race theory. They feel like it's just an extension of that, and it's critical race theory, but in college classrooms. And they think that the way that they're getting at that is by eliminating DEI jobs and DEI offices.
And all of this has been happening during a period of heightened tension on UNC campuses. Pro-Palestinian protests broke out in the spring and got international attention, particularly at UNC Chapel Hill.
Well, protests against the war in Gaza have been taking center stage at college campuses across the U.S.
Protests have spread to campuses right across the U.S., from the east to west coast.
This afternoon, hundreds marched through town, shutting down Franklin Street.
Brianna, how did that impact the conversation surrounding DEI funding?
A month after the Board of Governors committee passed that policy in April, the UNC Chapel Hill Board of Trustees had a vote to move DEI funding, which is about $2.3 million of initiatives, to public safety. One of the board trustees, Vice Chair Marty Kotis, he said that because of the protest, they need more money to fund campus police. And since the BOG committee passed this policy, why not take it from DEI?
We talk about peaceful protests, but when you destroy property or you take down the U.S. flag, and you have to put up gates around it that cost money, or deploy officers to do that, North Carolinians are watching all of this and they are not happy. And I think it's imperative that we have the proper resources for our law enforcement to protect the campus. And that means our property, and that means our flag as well.
So how did students respond to this decision by the Board of Trustees to redirect this funding to public safety?
This meeting that the Board of Trustees called was actually a special meeting that was held 2 days before a regular meeting that they were supposed to have. The special meeting was all done remotely. People didn't even know that they were planning on doing this DEI redirect funding vote. So over the next 2 days, people reacted on social media. They were really upset. They were upset with the connotation of essentially student protesters being blamed for DEI funding being moved to campus police. And then at the regular Board of Trustees meeting, which was in person in Chapel Hill, student protesters came and they held a demonstration.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
Is that an unusual thing? How do these types of policy changes happen normally?
Oh, it is completely unusual. And going back to the Board of Governors alone, their decision was highly unusual too. When I was talking about earlier how it's been shrouded in secrecy, usually when there's policy changes, it is a months-long to a years-long process. There are presentations, there are stakeholder meetings, they're meeting with faculty. Sometimes students are allowed to offer comments about how they feel about it. The DEI policy committee vote took 4 minutes. So it's,
wow,
completely unusual.
And while all of this may be unusual, it's a done deal here in North Carolina. Coming up after a break, we find out what the policy is being replaced with and if this means that DEI is really dead in higher ed.
Hey, I'm Anita Rao. If you like the thoughtful conversations you hear on the Broadside, you may also like the show I host called Embodied. Each episode is a deep dive into a topic related to sex, relationships, and health. We take on everything from how a schizophrenia diagnosis can impact intimacy to what it's like to be in a relationship with an AI chatbot or be a stand-up comedian with a stutter. We meet some incredible people who are down to explore big questions about our bodies and society, and talk about things that are sometimes a little taboo. You can get new episodes of our show each week. Find Embodied from WUNC wherever you get your podcasts.
So now that the DEI policy has been repealed, what has it been replaced with?
Yeah, it's been replaced with a new policy called Equality within the University of North Carolina. This policy enshrines this ideal of institutional neutrality, and a lot of it goes back to that campus free speech law, where they're saying university staff can't have political opinions, they can't endorse political opinions. But the policy itself is very broad, it's very vague. Don't be politically controversial, and without really giving any context as to exactly what that is.
How do you define something as politically controversial? I mean, that can mean so many things to so many people, right?
It can.
So who does this impact and how?
This impacts all of the public universities in the state, all of the students, all of the faculty members, all of the staff. They said that student groups aren't affected by this policy, but students use the DEI offices on their campuses, they use the centers on their campuses, and both of those things are directly mentioned either in the policy itself or in the additional legal guidance that was sent out to chancellors. It's unclear right now, though, because of how broad the policy is, what is going to happen on campuses. Some of them have already said that they're closing their DEI offices. Some of them said that they're going to be making changes to their centers, but you can't really know the widespread impact it's going to have after that. Because in Florida and Texas, they told people at the start, oh, no one is losing their job, centers are fine. Less than a year later, hundreds of people lost their jobs and half a dozen centers are closed in Texas. And I actually spoke with a lawyer and professor from Elon University about this. His name is Eric Fink, and he said essentially because the policy is so vague and is so broad, people can use it to try to further along more closures even later down the road once everything is set in stone.
Any person who thinks that something that's going on at the University of North Carolina transgresses this policy, or something is going on that they don't like, can make a complaint that this is transgressing the policy. They may be right or they may be wrong, okay? But even if they're wrong, it can still cause trouble.
Of course, this impacts a lot of campuses, a lot of students, but do you have a general sense of how students feel about this change?
Yeah, I have spoken to students at multiple universities. Students have been getting together to have protests outside of and at board meetings. A lot of students are upset about the direction that this is going. One of the students I spoke with is an NC State student, Isaac Hedges, who was essentially saying that marginalized communities already don't have enough support.
And that has to be actively fought back against. Active programs have to be made to introduce that equity. It will not happen on its own due to the system itself.
And they feel like the UNC system is taking away the little bit of support that they do have at universities.
I know that this might not be like a direct line, but has this shift around DEI policy had any impact on private universities in North Carolina?
That is a really good question. we will have to wait and see for private universities. I spoke with one president at a private university, a private HBCU actually in North Carolina, and she said she is welcoming any students who don't feel like they have a space on a public university, because her university is going to continue to offer DEI and supports. So it would be interesting to see if private universities kind of turn this into almost a sales pitch to say, hey, you don't like what's going on? Come on over to us. We don't have a university board of governors. We don't have to worry about, where our money is going in terms of DEI initiatives. We have all these supports for you guys. So it'll be interesting
like a recruiting plan. Yeah. What about historically Black colleges and universities? How does this impact them? Because they're also, we have HBCUs that are also in the UNC system, and they have a very different mandate than other schools. How are they handling this? Have you talked to anybody at an HBCU about what this is going to mean for them?
Yeah, North Carolina is a hot spot for HBCUs. We have 5 public ones. We have the largest one in the United States, which is North Carolina A&T State University. And HBCUs, I've reached out to them. I only got 2 responses back. North Carolina Central University said that they were reviewing the guidance and the policy and that they would have their decision in on time. Winston-Salem State University told me that they didn't even have a DEI office, and they also said that they would have their information and changes in on time. They've been pretty quiet about it.
You mentioned a deadline that's approaching. Each school must comply with the new policy on that date. When is that deadline, and what's going to happen then?
Yes, the deadline is September 1st. All university chancellors, and then also the North Carolina School for Science and Math, they have to tell UNC System President Peter Hans essentially what DEI supports they're removing and how they are going to put it towards what they call student success initiatives. I looked up student success on the Board of Governors website, and it's essentially things that increase the graduation rate and student mental health services. So for UNC Chapel Hill, for example, some of their money might be going into CAPS. That's their counseling and psychological services that they have. But yeah, we'll just have to wait to see what chancellors are going to do and how far they're going to take the policy, essentially.
So what do you think this means more broadly for the future of DEI at public universities in North Carolina? Is DEI really dead?
I don't think it's dead because students are too passionate about it. I think this means that students are going to have to be the ones that are advocates, and students are going to have to be the ones that initiate these supports on their campuses because of how vague the policy is. One of the things that Eric Fink, the lawyer from Elon, was mentioning is that it'll likely cause a chilling effect. Staff members are going to be afraid to be super vocal for or against something because of this policy and because they don't want to get laid off due to this policy. Supports are going to change. We've seen it happen in Florida. We've seen it happen in Texas. And because of how similar North Carolina is moving in that direction, we're likely going to face the same closure of offices and removal of supports like centers.
After our conversation with Brianna, the deadline for compliance with the new UNC policy came and went. At the moment of publishing this episode, we still don't know just how extensive the changes will be at each school. If you'd like to follow Brianna's continuing coverage of DEI at college campuses across North Carolina, we've dropped a link in the show notes. This episode of The Broadside was produced by me, Anissa Khalifa, and editor Jared Walker with help from Charlie Shelton Ormond. Our executive producer is Wilson Sayre. The Broadside is a production of WUNC North Carolina Public Radio and is part of the NPR network. You can email us at broadside@wunc.org. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating, a review, or share it with a friend. I'm Anissa Khalifa. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back next week.
The candidates for November are set.
I know Donald
Donald Trump's type.
Between now and Election Day,
we are not going back.
A campaign season unfolding faster.
Kamala Harris is not getting a promotion
Than any in recent history.
Make America great again.
Follow it all with new episodes every weekday on the NPR Politics Podcast.